Hello, and welcome back to the William Gomes podcast. I am William Gomes, and I'm grateful to have you here. This series is called Reading Seminar 1 and 2, Lacan's Return to Freud Revisited. In the previous episode, we examined the emergence of the symbolic order and saw why Jacques Lacan insists that subjectivity is structured by relations that precede intention, image, and conscious mastery. The subject we saw is positioned symbolically rather than grounded in ego coherence. In this episode, we return to the ego, but now from a sharper angle. If the symbolic order structures subjectivity, then what role does the ego play in analytic work? Lacan's answer is uncompromising. The ego functions as resistance. This claim can easily be misunderstood. It does not mean that the ego is an enemy to be destroyed, nor that ego stability is inherently pathological. It means that the ego operates to defend coherence, identity, and mastery in the face of structural division. To understand this, we must recall what the ego is. As we have already seen, the ego is an imaginary construction. It is formed through identification with images of wholeness, unity, and self consistency. It allows the subject to say, I am this, and to sustain a narrative about who they are. This function is necessary. Without it, everyday life would be impossible. But this necessity becomes a problem in analysis. Analysis is not oriented toward preserving identity. It is oriented toward allowing the subject to encounter the structure that divides them. When analytic work approaches this division, the ego intervenes. It intervenes not maliciously, but defensively. The ego resists anything that threatens its coherence. This resistance does not always appear as opposition. It often appears as stability. This is a crucial point. In many therapeutic models, ego strength is treated as a sign of progress. A stable sense of self, clear boundaries, and consistent narratives are taken as indicators of psychological health. Lacan reverses this evaluation within the analytic context. A strong ego can be the most effective resistance to analysis. Why? Because the stronger the ego, the more effectively it can integrate disturbances into its narrative. Contradictions are explained away, disruptions are rationalized, repetitions are justified. Nothing unsettles the image of self mastery. This does not mean that ego strength is bad in general. It means that ego strength is not an analytic goal. When psychoanalysis aims to reinforce the ego, it risks closing off the very space where the unconscious could appear. This is why Lacan is deeply critical of approaches that treat autonomy, self-confidence, or emotional regulation as the aims of analysis. That aims belong to psychology, not psychoanalysis. From a Lacanian perspective, reinforcing the ego often means reinforcing resistance. The ego's resistance is subtle. It does not simply refuse to speak. It speaks very well. It produces coherent explanations. It offers insight. It narrates history in a convincing way. It understands itself. All of this can give the impression that analysis is progressing. But what is progressing in such cases is the ego's capacity to manage disturbance. The unconscious, by contrast, remains untouched. This is why Lacan insists that the analyst must not support ego defenses. Support here does not mean encouragement in a moral sense. It means interventions that confirm the ego's narrative, reassure its identity, or align with its ideals. For example, When an analyst validates the analysand's self-understanding too quickly, they may be reinforcing the ego's resistance. When the analyst explains why they analyze and behaves as they do, they may be offering the ego a new narrative that preserves coherence. These interventions can be well intentioned, they can reduce distress, but they often come at the cost of analytic truth. This also clarifies why Lacan insists on the analyst's restraint. Restraint is not indifference, it is an ethical position that refuses to collude with the ego's demand for coherence. By not responding at the level of the ego, the analyst allows speech to move beyond it. This movement is rarely smooth. When the ego's defenses are not supported, anxiety often appears, confusion increases, certainty gives way to doubt. From the standpoint of psychological therapy, this can look like regression. From the standpoint of psychoanalysis, it indicates that resistance is being displaced. The ego is no longer able to absorb everything into its narrative. This displacement does not eliminate the ego, it reveals its limits. This brings us back to the distinction between resistance as obstacle and resistance as structure. Earlier in the series, we saw that resistance belongs to the analytic situation. The ego's resistance is one of its most consistent forms. The ego resists not because it is stubborn, but because it is doing what it was formed to do: maintain identity. Psychoanalysis does not aim to destroy this function. It aims to prevent it from becoming the horizon of analysis. This is why Lacan insists that the analyst must not address the ego as the subject. When the analyst speaks to the ego, they speak to misrecognition. When they listen beyond it, they allow the subject to appear. This distinction is delicate and cannot be reduced to technique. There is no rule that tells the analyst when the ego is functioning as resistance. There is only the ongoing work of listening to how speech is structured. This also explains why analysis often feels difficult. To loosen the ego's grip is to loosen the subject's certainty about who they are. This can be unsettling, even frightening. But this unsettlement is not a failure of analysis. It is its condition. By treating the ego as resistance rather than as solution, Lacan preserves Freud's most radical insight. Freud showed that the ego is not master in its own house. Lacan shows why treating the ego as master closes the door to analytic work. This prepares us for the final stretch of the series. If the ego functions as resistance, then analytic technique must be reconfigured accordingly. In the next episode, we will examine what technique looks like after the ego has been displaced from the center. We will explore silence, interruption, and refusal of guidance as technical acts, and we will see how Seminar 2 transforms analytic practice at its core. Thank you for listening. This is the William Gomes podcast. Take care of yourself, stay curious, and if you found this episode helpful, you're very welcome to follow, share, leave a comment or a rating. I'll speak with you again soon